is grace exactly, and why is it a gift? I mean, there's lots of books written about grace. We talk about it a lot, but do we ever really understand what it is, and have we ever really experienced it? Well, Gavin Adams, one of our regulars, is here today to talk to us about what grace is and how we can understand it and how we can practically show and demonstrate it to others. I can't wait to find out a little bit more about this topic because it feels like there's so much information, but I still don't understand it. Grace, it's what we're talking about right now. So this month, we're having just one person in just to get to talk a little bit more in depth and have a little bit more of a good conversation that we can do when we have all of our panelists here. And so we're so thrilled to have you here, Gavin.
You chose me.
We chose you. You're the one
Right.
setting the standards for all of this.
Yeah, the benchmark.
The benchmark.
High or low, it's irrelevant. It's still a benchmark.
Well, grace is something I wanted to talk about, and I know this is an important topic for you. You've preached on it as a pastor. You have to teach about it a lot. So tell me, what's the big deal about grace, first of all? Why is that such a big thing? Why are there so many books written about it?
Well, I would probably say it's a big deal because it's the foundation of the Christian faith. I mean, it's a big deal because really everything does kind of rise and fall on grace. Even, I mean, the whole thing, I guess we would maybe argue, comes down to a death and a resurrection of Jesus. Right. But that was out of grace. The reason that happened was because of grace. So grace is undeserved favor or undeserved merit. I used to teach this all the time with middle school students. And I would tell them, you know, I would get 3 of them on the stage and tell the first kid to punch me in the arm, and he would punch me. And I'd just punch him back. And I would say, that's fairness, you know? And then the next kid, I would say, now you punch me. And they'd say, no, I'm not punching you. I said, no, punch me. Trust me. And they didn't. And then I forced them to punch me. And then I pretended to punch him, but I didn't. I said, that's mercy. You didn't get what you deserved. Mercy. The next kid, I said, punch me. He punched me. And I gave him a candy bar. I said, that's grace. You got something really great that you didn't deserve. And so grace is so important. Every faith, every world religion, even, I mean, Judaism, everything outside of Christianity is built upon a fairness mindset or a fairness foundation.
You get what you deserve.
You get what you deserve.
You
earn your way to acceptance. There's a good God. He must like good people. If I'm good enough, I get to hang with him. Christianity is the only belief system that is built on grace, which means it is really important to understand.
Wow. So it really is the foundation for the whole Christian religion.
I mean, I think so. Well, but I could be wrong. But I think it's really important.
Well, when you talk about, you know, for example, fairness, it seems like we know what fairness is, and we certainly know what unfairness is, but we don't see a lot of grace. Like, I don't have people that I punch handing me candy bars.
No, no. Well, and the reason that we understand fairness is because we live in a world of fairness. Right. This is why our children, you know, like I have 4 kids. My kids love the phrase, that's not fair. Right. I have never heard them say, that's not gracious. They never say that. They always say that's not fair. And the reason is because they've grown up in a world, in a society, in a culture, and my home probably included, that is built on fairness. So it's easy to understand that.
Well, don't you think, I mean, little kids from the very beginning know that. You cut a piece of cake and there's one size that's a little bit bigger one, than they say that's not fair.
That's right.
It's almost like that's inbred in us. And so even more importantly then is that grace is something that's so contrary to everything we know from, it seems like, what we're born with.
Isn't that ironic that the foundation of Christian faith is grace, yet it may be the hardest concept to understand, even though it's beautifully simple.
Right.
I think it may be one of the key reasons that people don't grasp the gospel or grasp faith, because it's so hard to understand.
Well, you've done a lot of thinking on this, I know, and I'm really excited to get to some practical things that you have. You're going to tell us how we can actually experience grace ourselves, and then how we can demonstrate it to other people, because if we can't show it to other people, they'll never understand what God's grace is. So if you want to know more about grace, if you want to experience it, you want to learn how to show it to others, stay tuned, because after this break, we're going to get into the deep and dirty details of grace. Yeah, that'll be Welcome Welcome back. We're talking about grace, and not just sort of the abstract concept of grace and it's grace of God or saying grace before meals, which is what most of us are familiar with. You've actually done some really hard thinking on this about ways that we can experience it and ways that we can show it.
Yeah.
And you've narrowed it down into some real easy kind of statements to remember. And it's we should care more about, we should care less about.
Right.
So let me just start with the first one of those,
Well,
which is...
can I say real quick,
Yeah.
the reason I think this is important is if it really is the foundation of Christianity, we should understand it and we should learn to live it and learn to experience it. I mean, if it really is that important.
Right.
So for me, it's trying to figure out ways to make it just insanely practical so that we can experience it and then eventually embody that for others to experience it through us.
Yeah, because if it's a world of fairness, they probably never experienced it.
And we don't want to just know about it. We really want to experience it. I mean, if God...
I do.
If God did send... I want a candy bar.
Exactly.
So if God really did send Jesus out of his love and grace for us, right? If it was based in grace, then we need to understand how to live that and how to really experience it. Hence all the thinking. So
and that's a problem for a lot of us is we don't even know how to accept grace. We don't even know,
because it doesn't exist anywhere in the world, right?
And it's so far out of our human mindset, I think, too.
Right.
All right, so your first statement is we should care more about receiving God's love and care less about trying to earn God's love. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think because of the world we live in is so fairness-based, we do pretty much earn what we get. I mean, every paycheck I get, I kind of earned that. I can't not show up for work for a month and a half and still be paid. I mean, we would never expect that, right? Because we live in a world of fairness. But when it comes to God's love, it is the most unfair thing. I mean, this is what made Jonah so mad. He knew if he went to Nineveh that God's grace was going to be so prevalent that the people he hated were going to be forgiven, and he couldn't take it. Yeah, he couldn't take it.
He wanted them to be punished.
That's right. Yeah, he said, I want them to get what they deserve, right? Because that's the world I live in. That's how things should be. But not in God's economy. It's different. And so for us to experience God's grace, we have to care a lot less about earning it because you can't earn it anyway, right? None of us deserve it.
So what does earning it looks like? What? Me trying to be good because I think God will love me more or God will answer my prayers if I'm good?
Yeah, I think earning it looks like conditional acceptance or conditional love. If I do, then he will love me. If I live a certain way. If I pray every morning, if I read my Bible. I mean, how many times have we found ourselves, and I'm guilty of this too, thinking if I do it this way, God will hear my prayer. If I spend the first 5 minutes of my day with him, my day will automatically be better. Like I'll never get a flat tire. Nobody will be sick, And then your kid comes home with a stomach virus from school.
Yeah, and I'm mad because I got up.
That's right. You're like, whoa, wait. I did it. I did the formula.
That's not fair.
That's right. And so I think when we can move, I mean, part of it is just understanding that our world and God's economy and our economy is just different. When we understand that, at least intellectually, it allows us to begin to live it differently. And living it differently means we stop trying to earn something that's being freely given to us, which is grace.
Yeah, and so it's just learning to accept that's being given. That's good. All right, you say we should care more about being real and care less about faking an ideal. What exactly do you mean by that?
I think there's something in all of us as Christians. We understand that God has an ideal. We do. I mean, God has an ideal marriage. He has an ideal way of living out marriage, of living out parenting, of living out, workplace behavior. He certainly has an ideal in morality. I mean, it's all the do's and don'ts of the Bible. We have a lot of clarity, not on all of it, but we have a lot of clarity on some of it, or maybe most of it. So I know that there's this ideal, but I also know that there's a real that's happening. And I really never live up to the full ideal. But for some reason, as Christians, we want to pretend that we do. We want to walk around. It's when we walk into church and people say, how you doing? And we go, oh, we're great. But we're really not. Because the ideal is great and we're nowhere close to it. Our marriage is struggling. We don't know what to do with our teenager who just started dating. We don't know what to do with the diagnosis we just got. We're frustrated with God because things haven't worked out. So there is an ideal, but there's a real, and there's something gracious about understanding that the difference is in our life, and that it's okay to acknowledge it, And it's okay to live in the real.
So there's nothing wrong with trying to live the ideal or going forth.
Now, there is something
that is.
wrong if you're doing it to try to earn God's love.
Okay, which is back to number one.
That's right. But there's nothing wrong with understanding that God has a better plan for your life than you might.
And so again, it's like trying to keep all of the commandments or all of God's laws.
Yeah.
We should
I mean, do
try
not
for
murder
that.
is a great idea. Right? We should try not to do that.
But what you're talking about, the being real part, is knowing that we fail. We don't live up to that ideal.
Right.
And instead of trying to pretend like we do.
That's right. And being transparent about that. And being okay admitting that. I mean, when gosh, we were told so many times throughout Scripture that to have accountability, that we should confess our sins before others. Why in the world would you do that? I think because of this. It's about being real. It's about being open. It's about understanding that you haven't arrived there. I mean, when Paul talked about the renewing of your mind, he doesn't say that, and eventually you'll get there and be done. I think it's a process that at least into eternity is going to continue to happen.
Well, and sometimes when I see other people's failures, it makes me feel like I can work harder and I can try harder and I can learn from them and I'm not alone.
That's
and I don't want to
why-
give up then,
Yeah, that's why, and you mentioned this in the last show, I think, but that's why as a pastor, I try so hard from the pulpit, from our stage, to just be real about stuff. You know, I spend a whole day preaching about the worst moment in my marriage because it's ridiculous for people to think I don't have those. That's ideal, right? It's not real.
Right.
In fact, for people, I tell people this all the time, it's kind of offensive, but I'm okay with that. If you're at a church where the pastor is so ideal that it feels unreachable, you probably should go to another church because he's lying to you.
And because we see that all the
None of us
time
are
in
that
churches,
perfect.
right? We look up and we see, oh, well, the pastor's
That's
all
right.
that. I shouldn't swear. I shouldn't do this in front of the pastor. I shouldn't.
Yeah.
But it's
Ask
crazy to
his
think that the
kids.
pastor might do this.
Ask his kids. This is why preachers' kids are, they're the best, the honesty policy. You talk to a preacher's kid, they know who that person really is at home. They see him every day, you know. The pastor may say, oh, the Spirit's moving. The kid's going, no, he didn't. He just didn't play in the service, because the kids know. The kids get it. And so I just feel like that there's something so healthy about acknowledging the difference between real and ideal and knowing that you're forgiven anyway.
Yeah.
That's what grace is.
Yeah.
You don't have to earn the forgiveness. And if you're already forgiven for missing the ideal, why fake it?
Yeah.
If you're already forgiven.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I get that. One of the things that you also say is we should care more about a future with God and care less about a past away from God. And I think probably what you're talking about there is when we've really screwed up and that just hangs over us and we keep replaying it in our mind.
Yeah.
And
hence the need for grace, right? I mean, some of us have messed up in a way that we could make up for it. You stole $15, you can repay $15, you know?
Right.
Or maybe repay 20, now you feel even better about yourself.
Right.
So, I mean, there's ways to make up for some things, but, there are things that I have done I can't make up for. The kid that I maybe made fun of in 5th grade, I can't make up for that. And think about the things that have happened in our lives and in our friends' lives.
Right.
You can't relive that spring break.
everybody's first marriage.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't relive you can't take back the words that are coming out of your mouth. I mean, they're out, you know. So you can ask for forgiveness. You can try to make amends. You can try to repair relationships. But in the end, I think we can get so wrapped up in how can God forgive a person like me that we lose the fact that he can leverage it to do something amazing through you. And that's the grace of God, that he can take that past and not just forgive you for it, but do something in you and through you because of it.
That's oftentimes the holdup, right? Is like I can maybe understand God could forgive me for that, but how could God ever use a loser like me after I screwed up in whatever way that I did? Like, why would he want to? And who am I to talk about those things if you look at my past and see? But you're saying that that's where grace comes in.
Yeah, and he's God. I mean, your past may be bad, but I mean, for everybody's bad past, I can point to at least 40 biblical characters who had way worse pasts, right? I mean Moses, David, I mean all these guys, right? And so yet God seemed okay when he used them, you know? Now he would prefer them not have the past, not because of the forgiveness problem, not because of losing love. He would prefer them avoid that because it makes their life better when they can avoid it.
Yeah.
But he's okay using it. And I think there's a gracious thing in that.
That's good. That's good. All right. So the next one you have is we should care more about remaining dependent and care less about clinging to control. What is that all about?
Well, there's a real, and this is primarily an American cultural thing, but we strive for independence. You know, we want to be independent.
We're Americans.
Right, yeah. We want to retire early. We want to be self-sufficient. We want whatever.
I don't need your help.
That's the opposite of what God wants. You know, in fact, I think sometimes, I mean, don't email me about this or whatever. Don't quote me for sure. But I think sometimes God might just allow things to happen to keep us dependent on Him.
Yeah.
Because that dependency is so relationally necessary between us and God. And I just think it's easy to lose our place with God, where we think that, you know, we're kind of God and He's serving us instead of the other way around. But when you're dependent on Him, and we don't wake up every morning going, thank you for the air I breathe. And my, you know, but the reality is that without that, we're not here. And it's because of God we have it. So there's this beautiful thing about releasing control and trusting in God that He's in control. But it takes belief in His grace to believe that can be done. Because everything in me wants to close my fist. This is a posture thing. You know, I want to close my fist and control everything myself because I feel like I can control it, even though I can't. What we forget is when we close our fist to God, it's faux control anyway. It's fake control.
Because we're really not.
We're really not in control. But when we close our fist to God, we are also limiting what He can do and give to us, because it's hard to give somebody something whose hands are closed. You can only accept something like this when your hands are open. So I think it's when we release control and we trust in His grace, we actually begin to experience it.
Yeah, going back to something you said just earlier in that, my father-in-law recently said to me, God never gives us more than we can handle.
Yeah, He gives me more.
And my thought is He always gives me more than I can handle.
He specializes in that.
Because it drives me to Him. Because I don't know what else to do. There's nobody else to depend on. I'm all alone. I have to, you know, I can't fix it on my own.
Exactly right. Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
That's not in the Bible. Right. That God will never give me more than I can handle. He did not say that. He did say He'll give you a way out of temptation. That's different. But we kind of misquote that into he'll never give me more than I can handle. He doesn't say that.
Right.
So
well, He'll never give us more than He can handle.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I think that's the exact
in us
thing.
and through us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So your next one is we should care more about the bigger picture and care less about being the biggest thing.
Yeah.
That one kind of hits home, doesn't it?
Well, it hits home for me because as a pastor, and any time you are put in a place of influence, there's something in us that really desires that. And I think that's a healthy thing when it's lived out in a healthy way. If you talk to teenagers today, the number one thing they want is fame.
Fame, yeah.
Right? They which is really scary.
Yeah.
that's a problem.
But even me, I write books. I want all my books to hit the New York Times bestseller list.
I know.
Want,
and you know what? I mean, I lead a church that's a big church. It used to not be. I used to go to restaurants in our community and nobody knew who I was. And now I can't go anywhere without people recognizing me. And it feels good because it's nice to know that our church has grown to that point. But it also feels good a little bit in kind of an unhealthy way. Because you kind of begin to think you're a bigger deal than you are. And I have to really be careful about that.
Yeah.
I think all of us who have any level of influence at all have to be careful about that. I think when we begin to lean into the bigger picture, it's a gracious way of seeing God as being more important than us, and His agenda being more important than ours, and His influence and His kingdom being bigger than our kingdom. In fact, our kingdom is for His kingdom, not the other way around. And I think it's easy to get those, though, out of balance.
So when I want my books to do well, because I really believe that there's a message in there that will help people, that will, that God has given me, or the author that I'm working with has given him, that's a good reason to want it. But if I just want it to be big because I want to be famous and make lots of money, that's not.
Let me give you a quick example. You can grow a really big church without Jesus. All it takes is a charismatic leader.
Yeah.
I mean, you can generate a following, and we see that in cults all the time, right? You can build a big church without Jesus. You can build a way bigger, more influential one with Him. But to do that, you can't be the big deal. He has to be. And I think that's what, but it's trusting in that grace and trusting that in His grace, when you allow Him to be the big deal, He may elevate you to be a big deal. But even if He doesn't, it's okay. Because His kingdom's more important than yours.
So, the charismatic leader, you said, may grow a big church, but Jesus is what grows a deep church, an influential church, or whatever.
And you know what? Every time I begin to think, look what I've done, I actually stop experiencing a little bit of His grace. When I look around and go, oh my gosh, look what He's done, I really do experience His grace because you give Him the credit. So I think that's about the
And
experience.
it's false credit a lot of times we take too, isn't it? Because like
Yeah.
we think we did it, but like really did we?
No,
you know,
not at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so we should care more about living heaven now and care less about experiencing heaven later.
Yeah.
But isn't heaven for eternity kind of important? And
Well, I think there's this really interesting misnomer about eternity beginning at death. But if eternity really is infinite, then it means it's happening now.
yeah,
Eternity
that's a good point.
begins right now.
Okay.
And so for me, growing up in the context of church I grew up in, it was all about if you get hit by a bus, what's going to happen?
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, I'm going to heaven, but man, I sure do hate the fact my girlfriend broke up with me yesterday. You know, it's like, so what does it look like to through God's grace to begin to experience heaven now, not just suck it up for the next 40, 50 more years till I die, hopefully. That hopefully won't be that that long, and then you get to experience heaven. I think there's something so gracious and beautiful about God's grace that it is available right now. But we have to position ourselves in a place where we get to experience it, and not just assume it's for the thereafter. It's for the here and now as well.
So what does heaven look like when your girlfriend breaks up with you?
I think it looks like in God's grace, knowing that it's actually going to be okay. And as silly as that is for a 14-year-old or
Right.
15-year-old,
It's a big deal when you're 14 or 15.
It's everything
And
when you're
it's-
14 or 15.
And it's everything when it's your marriage.
That's right. That's right. And so trusting, we'll take it out of something that does seem silly to an adult. I mean, put it into the terrible diagnosis, or put it into
Right.
the marriage where your husband just left you and it really wasn't your fault.
Right.
I mean, you had a slice of it, but it was
Sure.
2%.
Sure.
And it really was 98% him. Where is the here and now of heaven in that? It's trusting that in God's grace, you can actually experience a peace that surpasses all understanding in the midst of something that should have no peace.
in the middle of that chaos.
That's right.
That you can find that peace.
That is God's grace, and it's allowing heaven to enter right now.
And isn't it also, again, going back to what you're saying about being real versus ideal, instead of saying my marriage is perfect, saying no, there are problems there. Sometimes that speaks to someone else who maybe has
Absolutely.
time to save their marriage or has
Absolutely.
something. And so grace is
I
God
watch-
using me in the midst of.
I watch people go through some of the worst circumstances, and then a year later, God sticks them in the midst of someone else's circumstance just like it. And he leverages what happened to change somebody else. And it's his grace on both sides of that story that makes it so beautiful and makes it redemptive.
Yeah.
And that's where you begin to experience the grace. But you don't if you don't allow him to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what redeems my pain or my hell on earth, if you will.
Yeah.
Is
It's trusting
being
that
able to
God will
use it.
leverage everything for his good, not yours.
That's good.
But eventually yours, because you see it through his.
Okay. We sort of addressed this on a previous show, but you say we should care more about embracing our doubts and less about defying doctrine? What does that mean?
I think that there's this something in us Christians where we do want to have an answer for everything. And we feel like that any question that is brought up, we have to have an answer for it. And the reality is that, first of all, that's silly. Because the Bible isn't that clarifying on everything. We just really don't know. There is some things, but not everything. I think when we embrace doubt, we're allowing ourselves to experience God's grace through our faith. Because doubt and faith are required. We talked about that. So I think experiencing grace as we embrace that doubt is a huge part of experiencing his tangible grace right now.
So it's important to be able to do
Yeah.
that. It's not something we should worry about whether we're right or wrong. It's go, you know what, I have some questions.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah, and God and in God's grace, he's okay with that.
And he's okay with my questions.
Yeah, he's not
too.
offended by that.
All right.
Yeah.
We have a minute left, and you want to, the last one you have here is that we should care more about what God sees and care less about what they see.
Yeah, we talked about this too. This is about image management. This is about not allowing your fake self to take over who you really are. Because God knows your heart. He knows who you really are. And God can't, I think it's a struggle for God to use people who pretend to be someone they're not. But when you just allow yourself to be who you are, he's able to leverage that in his grace and change you and those around you. And you both experience grace the whole time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So all of these things are ways that we can experience
Absolutely.
grace. So
Yeah.
we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and just talk about maybe there are ways that we can, show this
Yeah,
grace to other
embody it.
people.
Yeah,
embody
absolutely.
it, actually. So stay tuned after this break. We'll be right back. Yeah, I think that there's some things. Welcome back. We've been talking about grace and what it is, and you've given us some ways that we can care more about some things and care less about it. But if you had to summarize all of those things, what is that? It's about experiencing grace? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like grace is not just a concept. It's an activity. It's first an activity of God in our direction. But if it is an activity, it means it's something that's meant for us to be felt. We're supposed to experience it, not just intellectually know about it. We should be able to live it. We should be able to feel it tangibly, and we should be able to experience it fully. So to do that, it means understanding some things, but then more, I think it means, Jennifer, embracing some things.
So things like God's love for us.
That's right.
And forgiveness.
That you can't
and all
earn
of
it,
those things.
but He loves you anyway.
Yeah.
That no matter how bad your past was, your future can be used. No matter how, things have gone, no matter how much you've tried to take control, that the minute that you allow Him to take control, you begin to experience something dramatically different.
Regardless of my doubts.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it all begins with a step in that direction. Most things in the Christian faith begin with a step, right? Sometimes it may feel like a leap, or it may be like an incremental baby step. But when we move a little bit towards God's grace, we begin to experience it a little bit more.
So it's critical that we understand God's grace in our life.
Absolutely.
But then the next step is we really need to show this to people who've never experienced it.
Yes.
And primarily that probably means people who are outside of the faith system.
Because it doesn't make any sense on the surface. That's right. So we're going to have to show it to them so that they can even begin to understand it.
All right. What I'd love for you to do is, would you come back and do another show on this? Only the next time.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
The next time what we'll do is we'll talk about, now that we understand it or we're experiencing it, how can we help other people to experience it? Because I think that's even more important is how do we do that? If it's,
well, one without the other is really incomplete.
Okay. Well, then we'll do a second show and we'll have you come back and do that. Thanks so much for being a part of this. If you want to learn more about grace and what it feels like, all of these tips will be great practical things you can do. And join us next time as we figure out how can we show this to other people who may have never experienced grace in a world of fairness. We're so grateful for you watching the show, and we look forward to coming back with a new show next time. Thanks so much.